No one showed up for my Thanksgiving dinner. My own kids called me from a fancy restaurant to mock my boring traditions. They thought I was just a sad, poor old woman. They didn't know their legacy would not be wealth, but a slab of granite carved with the story of their cruelty for all the world to see forever. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Thelma Johnson, and at 74 years old, my hands know the language of love. It's a language spoken in the careful kneading of dough, the patient basting of a turkey, the precise crimping of a pie crust. For 2 full days, my small warm kitchen had been my sanctuary and my workshop, a place where I translated a year's worth of quiet affection into a Thanksgiving feast fit for the small army that constituted my family. The turkey, a magnificent 16-pounder, rested golden brown on its platter, its skin as crisp as an autumn leaf. My sweet potato pies, their surfaces a perfect, glossy river of caramelized marshmallow, cooled on the windowsill. The scent of sage from the stuffing, of cinnamon from the apple crumble, of my late husband Herbert's famous buttery dinner rolls, all mingled in the air, a fragrant symphony of tradition and love. My dining room table, extended with its 2 extra leaves, was set for 12 with my best china, the one with the delicate gold trim that I only used for the most special occasions. My children, Franklin and Brenda, had promised they'd be here at 3 o'clock sharp. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," Frankie, my son of 49, had said on the phone earlier that week. "We'll bring the wine. You just work your magic." Brenda, my daughter, 46 and always so conscious of appearances, had added, "And please, Mom, make your famous 7-layer salad. I'm bringing Richard's parents this year and they are still talking about it from last year. I want everything to be perfect." So I did. I worked my magic. I peeled, I chopped, I baked to accommodate the 2 extra guests she was bringing. My back ached with a familiar dull throb, and my arthritic knees protested every trip from the oven to the counter, but my heart was full. This was my purpose, my greatest joy since Herbert passed. To gather my flock, my children and my 5 beautiful grandchildren, under my roof and fill their bellies with food and their hearts with the comfort of home. They saw me as a simple woman, I knew that. A quiet, frugal widow living out her days on a small pension in a modest, paid-off bungalow. They treated me with a kind of pitying condescension, their conversations often swirling around their own financial struggles, their mortgages, their desire for the bigger, better things their friends all seemed to have. They saw my simple, careful life and assumed it was the only one I had, the only one I could afford. They had no idea about the secret my dear Herbert, a quiet city accountant with a surprisingly brilliant mind for the stock market, had left me. They had no idea that their poor old mother was, in fact, a woman of considerable hidden wealth. Herbert had always been a private man. "Thelma," he used to say, "never let your left hand know what your right hand is earning. You live simply, you save diligently, and you keep your own counsel." We had lived by that mantra, raising our children with love and discipline, but not with extravagance. After he passed, I continued his tradition of quiet, prudent living. The vast portfolio of investments he had so astutely managed was left entirely to me, a secret I guarded as he had, intending to one day pass it on as a life-altering legacy for Frankie and Brenda and their children. That was my plan, my secret joy. The thought of the security, the freedom, their faces when they would one day learn of the fortune their simple parents had built for them, that was the light that warmed my lonely evenings. But lately, a subtle chill had begun to creep into our family dynamic. Frankie, ever more consumed by his desire to keep up with his wealthy friends, had become more dismissive of my old-fashioned ways. Brenda, married to a man whose family valued status above all else, had started making small cutting remarks about my cramped house, my dated furniture. They loved me, I told myself, they just didn't always respect me. They saw the surface, the frugal old woman, and had stopped looking for the substance underneath. Today, however, would be different. Today was Thanksgiving. A day for family, for gratitude, for pushing aside petty grievances. As I put the finishing touches on the table, placing a small handwritten name card at each setting, my heart was full of hope. The children would arrive, the house would fill with the chaotic, joyful noise of the grandkids, and for one golden afternoon, we would be a family, united in love and tradition. I glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece, the one Herbert had given me for our 30th anniversary. It was 2:45. Any minute now, I thought, a smile gracing my lips. Any minute now. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my own parents, chimed 3 times, its deep, sonorous tones echoing through the silent house. The aroma of roast turkey and sweet potato pie hung heavy in the air, a feast waiting for its guests. I stood by the front window, peering out at the empty street, a small, anxious knot forming in my stomach. Traffic, I told myself. It's always a bit of a mess on a holiday. They'll be here any minute. At 3:30, the knot in my stomach had grown tighter. I walked through my dining room, the table set for 12, gleaming and expectant. 12 empty chairs. 12 silent place settings. The food, so lovingly prepared, was beginning to lose its warmth, a fine sheen of cooling fat congealing on the surface of the gravy. By 4 o'clock, the anxiety had begun to curdle into a real, deep-seated hurt. It wasn't like them to be this late without a single call, a single text. Even at their most self-absorbed, they usually managed a hurried, running late mom. I pictured their cars broken down, a sudden illness, 100 small tragedies, my mind a whirlwind of motherly fear. At 4:30, my fear gave way to a dawning, sickening dread. I finally pulled out my old flip phone. I never did get the hang of those fancy new smartphones, and dialed my daughter Brenda. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. "Brenda, honey, it's Mom," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I'm getting worried. The dinner is ready. Is everything all right? Please just call me back." I tried Frankie next. Same result. Straight to voicemail. "Frankie, it's your mother. Please call me. Just let me know you're all safe." I sank into my armchair, the silence of the house now a deafening roar. The beautiful, festive home I had created felt like a stage for a play where all the actors had failed to show up. I was alone. Utterly, completely alone on Thanksgiving Day. The clock struck 5. And then finally my phone rang. It was Brenda. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. "Brenda. Thank heavens. Is everyone all right? What happened?" Her voice, when it came, was not filled with apology or concern. It was distant, a little tinny, and laced with an exasperation that struck me like a physical blow. In the background, I could hear the loud, festive din of a crowded room, clinking glasses, laughter, music. "Oh, Mom," Brenda said, her tone airy, almost dismissive. "We're so sorry, we should have called. We just got so swept up. We decided to do something different this year. We're at my in-laws' country club. Their Thanksgiving gala is just to die for. So much more our style, you know." Her words, each one a small, sharp icicle, pierced my heart. My in-laws. Their style. More than her own mother's, who had spent 2 days cooking for her, and the very in-laws she was meant to be hosting. Heartbroken, my voice barely a whisper, I pleaded, "But honey, I cooked all this food for you, for the grandkids, for your in-laws. You promised you'd be here. The table is set." There was an impatient sigh on the other end of the line. "Mom, don't be so dramatic. We can get leftovers tomorrow. Hang on, Frankie wants to talk to you." The phone was passed, and my son's voice, colder and more cutting than his sister's, came on the line. "Honestly, Mom, nobody wanted to come," he sneered, his voice utterly devoid of warmth. "Let's be real. It's the same boring meal every single year. Who wants your dry turkey and lumpy gravy when we can have prime rib and lobster thermidor? Your house is cramped, your stories are old, and frankly, we're starting new, better traditions with people who understand our lifestyle. It's time you just move on." Before I could even form a response, before I could defend my cooking, my home, my very existence, he hung up. I sat there, holding the dead phone to my ear, his words echoing in the silent, empty house. Dry turkey. Lumpy gravy. Cramped house. Old stories. Move on. The cruelty of it, the sheer, breathtaking callousness, was a physical thing. They hadn't just forgotten. They hadn't just been running late. They had deliberately, consciously chosen a better Thanksgiving, a more vibrant tradition, and had not even given me the simple human decency of a phone call. They had left me to wait, to worry, to hope, while they feasted and celebrated, my own carefully prepared dinner a symbol of my obsolescence. The love I had poured into that meal, the hours of painstaking work, the years of cherished tradition, it all meant nothing to them. I was a dreary obligation they had finally, gleefully shed. And the worst part? They felt no guilt. Only annoyance that I had dared to be hurt by it. The feast I had cooked for 12 now felt like a funeral banquet for one. And the person who had died, I realized with a chilling certainty, was the loving, naive mother I used to be. The silence in my home after Frankie's brutal phone call was a tangible thing, a thick, suffocating presence. My gaze drifted over the dining room table. A perfect tableau of love and anticipation now curdled into a monument of my own foolishness. The steam no longer rose from the mashed potatoes. The gravy had formed a dull skin. The magnificent turkey, the centerpiece of my efforts, sat cold and untouched. 12 empty chairs stood as silent, accusing witnesses to my abandonment. I should have been weeping. I should have been consumed by a grief so profound it brought me to my knees. And for a moment I was. A wave of pure, unadulterated heartbreak washed over me, so intense it left me breathless. My children. My babies. The ones whose lives I had built with the mortar of my own sacrifice. They had not just forgotten me, they had scorned me, mocked my traditions, and cast me aside for something newer, shinier, better. But then, as I sat there amidst the cooling feast, another emotion began to surface, pushing through the layers of my sorrow. It was a slow-burning ember at first, a flicker of indignation in the ashes of my heartbreak. It was anger. A righteous, purifying anger. How dare they? How dare they reduce my love, my home, my life's work to dry turkey and old stories? How dare they treat my most cherished tradition as a dreary obligation to be so callously discarded? Fueled by this new, strange energy, I did something I rarely did. I picked up the small, simple tablet my grandchildren had given me for Christmas 2 years prior, a device I mostly used for looking up recipes and playing solitary card games. My granddaughter had set up a social media account for me so I could see pictures of their school events and soccer games. I rarely looked at it, finding the constant stream of cheerful, curated lives a little overwhelming. But tonight, a grim curiosity propelled me. I opened the app, my fingers fumbling slightly on the screen. And there it was, at the very top of my feed. A new post from my daughter Brenda. It was a gallery of photographs, bright and professionally lit, taken not an hour ago. The first was a group shot. Brenda, her husband, her in-laws, Frankie, his wife, and all 5 of my grandchildren, beaming around a lavishly decorated modern dining table, glasses raised in a toast. The background was an elegant restaurant, all dark wood and crystal chandeliers, Brenda's in-laws' country club. The table was groaning with food I didn't recognize, platters of seafood, glistening cuts of prime rib, elaborate desserts that looked like architectural marvels. The caption, posted just 30 minutes ago, was the final devastating dagger to my heart. So much to be thankful for this year. Brenda had written, her words punctuated with a string of cheerful, festive emojis. Decided to start some vibrant new family traditions with the people who matter most. Out with the old, in with the new. Feeling so incredibly #blessed and #grateful. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Out with the old, in with the new. The words were a direct, public renunciation. I was the old. My traditions, my home, my love. It was all being swept aside for something she deemed more vibrant. And the hashtag family first. The hypocrisy of it, the sheer breathtaking audacity to post those words while her own mother sat alone in a silent house beside a cold feast she had cooked for them, it was monstrous. The public nature of her post, the cheerful broadcast of their betrayal, was what finally incinerated the last vestiges of my grief and sorrow. This wasn't just a private slight anymore. This was a public declaration. They were not just neglectful, they were proud of it. They were celebrating their abandonment of me as a positive, vibrant, new step in their lives. I stared at the photo of their smiling, happy faces, and my heartbreak transformed into something else entirely. It became a cold, hard, unyielding resolve. The Thelma Johnson who had spent her life making excuses for them, who had absorbed their casual disrespect, who had allowed them to treat her as a dusty, sentimental relic, died in that moment. They saw me as poor, simple, powerless. They had no idea. They had no idea about the secret Herbert had left me, the quiet fortune he had so astutely built, a fortune I had been so lovingly, so eagerly planning to bestow upon them. They had no idea that the poor old mother they had so casually discarded was, in fact, a woman of immense means. My mind, once clouded with a mother's pain, was now terrifyingly clear, sharp with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. They wanted to start new traditions. They wanted to move out with the old. Very well. I would help them. I would give them a new tradition they would never forget. A tradition of consequences. I looked at the picture of my late husband on the mantelpiece. "Oh, Herbert," I whispered, my voice no longer trembling but filled with a new icy strength. "Our children, they have forgotten the most important lesson you ever taught them, the value of a loving heart." I stood up, my back straight, my gaze fixed. I walked to the old, dusty lockbox hidden in the back of his closet, a box I hadn't opened in years. The time for grieving was over. The time for planning had begun. My children had just made the most expensive mistake of their lives. The night after Thanksgiving was a long, sleepless one, but it was not spent in sorrow. Instead, fueled by a cold, righteous fury, I sat at my dining room table, the same table that had stood so pathetically as a monument to my abandonment, and I began to plot. The tools of my revenge were not anger and tears, but a quiet, methodical precision that would have made my late husband, Herbert, proud. The first step was to understand the full scope of my own power. I retrieved the old, heavy lockbox from Herbert's closet, the key still on my keyring where it had been for years. Inside, beneath his military service medals and our marriage certificate, was a series of thick leather-bound ledgers. To anyone else, they would have looked like simple accounting books. To me, they were the secret history of my husband's quiet genius. Herbert, a man who had worked as a city accountant for 40 years, had a passion for the stock market. It was his private hobby, his intellectual chess game. He never spoke of it in terms of wealth, only in terms of value and potential. He'd invested small, consistent amounts over decades, choosing obscure, undervalued companies he believed in, long before they became household names. After he passed, I had honored his quiet nature. I had never touched the portfolio, never changed my modest lifestyle. I simply let it grow, a secret garden tended by the financial advisor Herbert had trusted, a legacy I intended to one day gift to my children. That night I went online, my fingers flying across the keys of my tablet with a new, urgent purpose. I logged into the secure portal for the investment account, a portal I hadn't visited in over a year. The numbers that bloomed on the screen made me gasp. The portfolio had not just grown. It had exploded in value. The rainy day fund I thought I possessed was not a small puddle. It was a vast, deep ocean. I, Thelma Johnson, the simple widow my children so casually dismissed, was a multimillionaire. The knowledge was not a source of giddy joy, but of a profound, almost terrifying power. This fortune was the culmination of Herbert's wisdom and my own frugal discipline. It was meant to be a gift of love, a final act of parental provision for Frankie and Brenda, to secure their futures, to give them the easy life I had never known. But they had, with their callous cruelty on Thanksgiving Day, proven themselves utterly, completely unworthy of it. Their dismissal of me had not been because they thought I was poor. They had never even considered my financial state. Their disrespect was far more fundamental. They had dismissed me. My love, my traditions, my very presence had become an inconvenient, boring obligation to be shed in favor of something better. They had judged my worth and found it lacking. Now I would use the very fortune they never knew I had to teach them a lesson about true value. My resolve, already hard as iron, was now tempered into steel. The next morning my first call was not to my children, but to a man named Arthur Sterling, the sharpest, most respected estate lawyer in the city, a man known for his discretion and his brilliant legal mind. "Mr. Sterling," I began, my voice clear and steady, "my name is Thelma Johnson. I require your immediate assistance in comprehensively restructuring my last will and testament, and in exploring a few creative philanthropic endeavors." Our meeting was 2 days later. I sat in his plush office, my simple cloth coat a stark contrast to the expensive leather and polished mahogany, and I laid out my story. I told him of my quiet, hidden wealth, and then I told him of my children's Thanksgiving betrayal, of their sneering words on the phone, of Brenda's smug social media post. I did not cry. I presented the facts with the cool detachment of a historian recounting a particularly distasteful chapter of the past. Arthur Sterling listened, his expression transitioning from professional interest to a sort of quiet, respectful outrage on my behalf. "Mrs. Johnson," he said when I had finished, "your children's ingratitude is breathtaking. You are, of course, within your absolute rights to dispose of your estate as you see fit. I want to be very clear, Mr. Sterling, I said, leaning forward. My children, Franklin and Brenda, are to be removed from my will. Completely. They are to inherit nothing from me but the knowledge of what their cruelty has cost them. He nodded, making a note. And the bulk of your estate? The bulk of my estate, I said, a slow, deliberate smile touching my lips, will be dedicated to two very specific projects. Projects that will serve as a permanent public reminder of their choices. First, I told him I wanted to make a significant, legally binding pledge to my church, New Hope Baptist. Not just a donation, but a cornerstone gift to fund a project they had dreamed of for years but could never afford. A new community wing, dedicated to housing the homeless and providing meals for the hungry. It would be a major civic contribution, a celebrated act of philanthropy. Second, and this was the part that brought a sharp, dangerous glint to my eye, I wanted to commission a monument. A large, impressive, beautifully carved granite monument for my future gravesite, right next to Herbert's simple headstone. It was to be a work of art, something no one in our quiet cemetery could possibly miss. Arthur looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his sharp eyes. A monument, Mrs. Johnson? To what, may I ask? To a mother's love, Mr. Sterling, I replied softly, and to a lesson that needs to be learned by all who pass by. We spent the rest of the afternoon outlining the legal framework, establishing trusts, drafting the new will. It was complex, but my mind was sharp, focused. I felt a sense of power I had not known I possessed, the power of my own agency, my own wealth, my own righteous fury. My children thought they had left me alone with a cold turkey and a broken heart. They had no idea they had left me alone with a multi-million-dollar fortune and a plan for a revenge so profound, so permanent, it would be literally etched in stone. They thought they had moved on to better things. They were about to discover that the boring old mother they had discarded was about to become the most talked about and, for them, the most humiliating philanthropist in the city. The trap was being set not with anger but with lawyers, bank transfers, and the quiet, unassailable power of a woman who had finally decided to value herself. The wheels of my quiet revolution began to turn with a swift, satisfying efficiency. Arthur Sterling, my lawyer, was a master of his craft. Within a week, my old will was shredded and the new one was signed, witnessed, and ironclad. My children, Franklin and Brenda, were now legally entitled to the grand sum of $1 each upon my death. A token amount chosen specifically to signify that they had not been forgotten, but deliberately, consciously disinherited. My next meeting was not with a lawyer, but with Reverend Michael Knight of my church, New Hope Baptist. I had called him and requested a private, confidential meeting about a significant philanthropic matter. We sat in his quiet study, the same room where I had sought his counsel so many times over the years. This time, however, I was not there for comfort. I was there to enact a plan. I laid out my proposal. A substantial multi-million-dollar donation to the church, specifically earmarked for the construction of a new community wing. The Herbert and Thelma Johnson Wing for Outreach, I suggested, would house a soup kitchen for the hungry and a small temporary shelter for the homeless. It was the kind of legacy Herbert, a man with a deep but quiet compassion, would have adored. Reverend Knight was, to put it mildly, stunned into a reverent silence. He stared at me, then at the financial documents I presented as proof of my capacity to make such a gift, his eyes wide with disbelief. Thelma, he finally stammered. I had no idea. This is a miracle. A true blessing from the Lord. But, are you certain? This is an immense sum. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Reverend, I said calmly. My late husband and I were blessed with more than we ever let on. And I can think of no better way to honor his memory than by providing comfort and shelter to those in our community who have none. We spent the rest of the afternoon with the church council chairman, drafting a formal pledge agreement. My donation would be anonymous at first at my insistence. The generous benefactor wished to remain private until the groundbreaking ceremony. This was a crucial part of my plan. I wanted the news of the project to become a source of joyful anticipation in our community, before my children had any inkling of its source. My final and most personally satisfying task was commissioning the monument. I met with the city's most respected stonemason, a man named Mr. Giovanni, a true artist whose family had been carving granite for generations. I showed him the plot beside Herbert's grave. I want something significant, I told him. Not garish but permanent. A statement. We designed it together. A large, beautifully polished slab of dark granite, flanked by two smaller wings, almost like an embrace. It would be a landmark in our quiet little cemetery. And the inscription, the part one had spent nights composing, would be the centerpiece. I gave him the text and he looked at me with a new, profound respect. "This will be a powerful testament, Mrs. Johnson," he said quietly. The work was commissioned, a substantial deposit paid. Like the church wing, its existence remained my secret. The next few months were a quiet time for me. I continued my life, my simple routines, but now there was a secret, powerful current running beneath the placid surface. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The pain of my children's betrayal was still there, a dull ache, but it was no longer a debilitating wound. It was now fuel. The news of the church's miraculous, anonymous donation, and the plans for the new Johnson wing became the talk of the town. There was a feature in the local newspaper, a segment on the evening news. It was a story of hope, of generosity, of community spirit. And then, just as I knew they would, my children heard about it. Brenda called first, her voice full of a brittle, social climbing excitement. "Mom, did you hear about the new wing at New Hope? It's going to be named the Johnson Wing. Isn't that a lovely coincidence? My in-laws are so impressed. They're considering making a donation themselves to get their name on a plaque." "Is that so, dear?" I replied, my voice a model of grandmotherly innocence. Then came Frankie, his call laced with a familiar, greedy curiosity. "Mom, this anonymous donor at the church. They must be loaded. Do you have any idea who it is? Someone from Dad's old business circle, maybe?" "I have no idea, Frankie," I lied smoothly. "I suppose some people are just moved by the spirit of giving." They were clueless. Utterly, completely, blissfully clueless. They moved through their self-absorbed lives, still likely pitying their poor old mother, occasionally sending a perfunctory text message, never visiting. They had no idea that the anonymous donor they so admired, the one whose generosity was being celebrated throughout the community, was the very woman they had left to eat her Thanksgiving dinner alone. They had no idea that her meager estate, the one they were so impatiently waiting to inherit, had been transformed into a public monument of charity and a private monument of their shame. The groundbreaking for the new wing was scheduled for the spring. The monument was being carved. My legacy was being rewritten not by their hands but by my own. The final act of this quiet drama was yet to play out, but I knew with an unshakable certainty that the ending would be one for the history books. At least for the history of the Johnson family. The first inkling my children had that their world was about to shift on its axis came not from me, but from a small, discreet article in the society pages of the local newspaper. It was a profile of the city's most significant philanthropic gifts of the year, and it featured a small, elegant photo of me, shaking hands with Reverend Knight and the mayor at a private donor appreciation luncheon. The caption read, "Community philanthropist Thelma Johnson, whose recent multi-million-dollar donation will fund the new Herbert and Thelma Johnson wing for outreach at New Hope Baptist Church." My phone began to ring less than an hour after the paper hit the newsstands. It was Frankie, his voice a strangled squawk of disbelief. "Mom, what is this? The newspaper. It says you a multi-million-dollar donation? Is this a joke? Where did you get that kind of money?" Brenda called seconds later, her voice a shrill symphony of confusion and dawning, horrified greed. "Mama, the Johnson wing, it's our Johnson? How is this possible? You told us, we always thought." "You thought what, dear?" I asked calmly, having prepared myself for this very moment. "That I was a poor, simple old woman with nothing to her name? You assumed. You never asked. You were too busy with your own vibrant new traditions." Their shock quickly morphed into a furious, panicked sense of betrayal. Not because I had given the money away, but because they had never known it existed in the first place. The fortune they had so casually dismissed, the mother they had deemed not worth a Thanksgiving phone call, was suddenly a figure of immense wealth and power. And they had been left out. They demanded to see me. They appeared on my doorstep that evening, their faces a mixture of rage, confusion, and a new, sycophantic desperation. "Mom," Frankie began, his voice dripping with a false sincerity that made my stomach turn, "we had no idea. We're so sorry about Thanksgiving. We were just stressed. We never would have. You never would have what, Frankie? I cut him off, my voice like ice. Treated me like garbage if you knew I was rich? Is that it? Is a mother's worth to you measured only by her bank balance? No. Of course not. Brenda cried, her own performance equally unconvincing. We love you, Mama. We were wrong. So wrong. But this donation, it's our inheritance. Our children's inheritance. You can't just give it all away. Oh, but I can, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. And I went to my lawyer, Brenda, and I drafted a new will. You are both to receive the grand sum of $1. I wanted to make sure you understood you were not forgotten, merely judged. Their faces crumpled. The sheer, unassailable finality of it finally seemed to hit them. The fortune they had just discovered they were entitled to was already gone, gifted away because of their own callousness. But I wasn't finished. I had one final exhibit to present in the trial of their character. You were both so concerned about my legacy, I said, my voice cold and steady. So worried about what I would leave behind. So I took the liberty of commissioning a small addition to the family plot. A permanent reminder of my life. I slid a large, glossy photograph across the coffee table. It was the stonemason's final design for the monument. A magnificent, imposing structure of dark, polished granite, far grander than any other in our quiet cemetery. And at the bottom, beneath my name and dates, was the inscription, beautifully carved in deep, elegant letters. They leaned forward to read it, their faces pale. Thelma Johnson. A life of love and sacrifice. Her true legacy is in the community she cherished, not the children who forgot her. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Brenda's sharp, horrified gasp. This was not a private rebuke. It was a public declaration, an eternal testament to their shame. Their cruelty, their neglect on that fateful Thanksgiving, would be literally etched in stone for their children, their grandchildren, and anyone who ever visited our family plot to see for generations to come. It was a brand they could never escape. They stared at the photograph, then at me, their eyes wide with a dawning, helpless horror. They had no legal recourse, no emotional leverage. They had lost everything, not because I was cruel, but because they had been. They had made their choices, and now their consequences were to be carved in granite. They left without another word, two ghosts retreating from a future they had so arrogantly thrown away. I watched them go, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt the heavy weight of my sorrow begin to lift. The pain was still there, a faint phantom ache for the children I had loved. But it was overshadowed by a profound, unshakable peace. I lived out my days with a newfound purpose, overseeing the construction of the Herbert and Thelma Johnson wing, a place of warmth and shelter for the city's most vulnerable. I found joy in the gratitude of strangers, in the quiet dignity of my own choices. My legacy was secure. And it was a legacy of love, of compassion, of a quiet, unassuming woman who, when pushed too far, had found the strength to teach her own children the ultimate unforgettable lesson in what truly has value.